I wonder whether the comparison that Michael Heseltine has made is fair. Michael Heseltine, a week or so ago, drew a comparison between Nigel Farage and Oswald Mosley. His intervention is usually sharp, even by the standards of his long career. To liken Reform UK to a reincarnation of Mosley's movement is not a casual metaphor. It is the rhetorical equivalent of pulling a fire alarm, loud, disruptive, and designed to force the Conservative Party to confront its own anxieties about its future. And the question, I suppose, is really whether this comparison is analytically fair and what terms of reference we must use if we are to judge it responsibly. To begin with, we should separate three distinct strands in Heseltine's criticism. First, he's not claiming that Reform UK is a fascist organisation in structure or doctrine. He's pointing instead to an historical pattern of political entrepreneurs who mobilised disaffection through ethnic anxiety. For him, Mosley in the 1930s, Powell in the 1960s and Farage today are not equivalent figures but expressions of a recurring instinct. That instinct, fear of the outsider, suspicion of demographic change, the appeal to cultural grievance is what he says, something that is reincarnate. Second, Heseltine is speaking from lived memory. As one of the few surviving politicians who witnessed the end of Mosley's influence, the peaks of Powellism, and the long culture war over migration, he is not using history as a metaphor, he is using memory as a warning, and while memory can be distorted, it carries moral charge. Third, Heseltine is trying to prevent his party, the Conservative Party, from surrendering its internal veto against extremism. A pact with Farage would not only normalise him, it would signal that the Conservative Party no longer recognises its own red lines. His appeal is not analytical, therefore, but ethical. Do not trade power for principle. All of this raises the central question. Is Farage plausibly compared to Mosley in any serious historical framework? On the face of it, the answer is no. Mosley was a revolutionary authoritarian who embraced paramilitarism, anti-Semitism and corporatist dictatorship. Farage is a constitutional populist, opportunistic rather than doctrinal, and his movement lacks both ideology and organisational depth. Mosley wanted to replace parliamentary democracy, Farage simply wants to exploit it. Yet Heseltine is not talking about institutional design, he's talking about political psychology. If we frame his comparison in those terms, three different criteria emerge. Firstly, the mobilisation of grievance through ethnic or cultural threat. Mosley constructed a narrative in which Jews were the saboteurs of national renewal. Powell constructed a narrative in which non-white immigration would destroy national cohesion. Farage and Reform frequently construct a narrative in which immigration is the primary cause of social decay. The content differs, the scale differs, but the political grammar is recognisable. It reduces complex systems to a single culprit. It converts economic frustration into cultural suspicion. It turns minorities into a lens through which majority anxiety is refracted. Heseltine, who confronted Powellism in real time, detects the same emotional script too. The aesthetic of authenticity. And Mosley wore black shirts to signal militancy. Powell used classical rhetoric to signal gravitas. Farage uses a pint and a fag to signal that he is ordinary. Each figure performs a version of authenticity tailored to the discontent they seek to galvanise. Heseltine mocks this as theatrical. You never saw him without a tankard of beer. Then he turned up looking like a farmer. He is right, of course. Farage is a consummate actor, but in politics, performance is substance. A performed identity, like Harold Wilson's pipe, can be as politically potent as a real one. This is not a Mosley parallel, it's a populist parallel. Third point, the rhetoric of betrayal. All three figures built their influence on the claim that the establishment has betrayed the people. Mosley accused the mainstream of cowardice. Powell accused it of blindness. Farage accuses it of treasonous indifference to national borders. This betrayal narrative is the collective connective tissue across generations. It legitimizes rupture. It encourages voters to see compromise as surrender. It reframes opponents not as mistaken but as illegitimate. It is here more than anywhere that Heseltine's alarm begins to make real sense. So is the comparison fair? If we measure it by doctrine or institutional ambition, the answer is no. If we measure it by emotional strategy and the political uses of grievance, it becomes more credible to the point where I think it's true. Heseltine is not accusing Farage of fascism. He is accusing him of awakening the impulses on which fascism has historically been able to feed. Of tolerating fascism, in other words, of tolerating the National Front, of tolerating racism. The more interesting point here is what this tells us about Heseltine himself, though. He represents the last generation of conservatives who believe the party had a custodial duty, a responsibility to bind the country together, to manage diversity, to uphold the civic centre. For him, Farage is not merely a political rival, he is a dissolute force. His rise signals a collapse in the conservative instinct for national stewardship. That is why the word Mosley appears not as an historical equivalence, but as an alarm bell. Farage is not Mosley, but modern politics often turns on symbols, and Heseltine deploys the Mosley symbol to force his party to confront its own existential choice. The Conservative Party must now decide which tradition it wishes to inherit. The civic one nation pro-institutions tradition of Macmillan and Heseltine, or the insurgent, culture-driven, low-tax nationalism that Farage has come to embody. It cannot inhabit both. The Heseltine warning is essentially this: once you legitimize the politics of suspicion, you cannot control what it will demand next. And that, whether one agrees with Heseltine or not, is a judgment grounded in long experience.